Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to this month's live panel discussion, Going Virtual, Redesigning Your Next Event or Campaign. My name is Christine Kim, and I am the project coordinator for the Institute of Philanthropy, and I will be one of your moderators today. Before we get started, a couple of notes. This webinar will be a panel discussion with an opportunity to ask questions during, as well as after, during a Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the questions box using your GoToWebinar control panel. Now I'm very pleased to introduce my fellow panel moderator, Jessie Story. Jessie serves as the Marketing Project Manager for the Maricopa Corporate College and their affiliate, Maricopa Community Colleges, where she enjoys working with local nonprofits and fundraisers. She serves as a board member and marketing chair for the AFP Greater Arizona Chapter and is the state co-chair for the Arizona Women in Higher Education nonprofit organization. With a BA in English and an MBA from Arizona State University, Jessie enjoys helping organizations identify and share powerful stories with their communities. In her spare time, Jessie loves to play with her dogs, explore the outdoors, and teach self-defense classes for women. Welcome, Jessie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I swear I've done so many virtual events before, and I feel like I need a soundboard at this point with like applause and laugh track and everything. So thanks so much for having me. I am so excited to get started with this panel today. And we have several awesome key takeaways for everybody who's with us today. So first, we're going to discover why online fundraising is vital to your organization's long-term fundraising strategy. We're also going to explore how to position your organization to stand out to prospects and donors on social media. We are also going to look at cultivating peer-to-peer fundraising and activating current stakeholders. And then finally, we are going to improve data analytics to measure and report on the impact of your digital fundraising initiatives. Now, I am really excited to welcome two incredible panelists. I've gotten to know them a little bit over the last few weeks, and you guys are really in for a treat with these two ladies. So first, we have Tournas. She is the Development and Events Manager for Junior Achievement of Arizona, and she's proud to be an Arizona native who enjoys adventure, DIY projects, and spending quality time with her family and large group of friends. Bree and her husband love building improvements into their home and are even currently constructing their next home from the foundation up. While a Junior Achievement of Arizona, she changes lives every day by using her creativity, organizing, and people skills to raise funds through philanthropy and special events. Bree constantly drives forward in her life, building her experiences and striving to conquer the next adventure. Bree, I feel like all of your interests are serving you very well in the quarantine right now. And our second panelist is Laura Rice. She is the Senior Director of Development for National University. Laura has worked in fundraising and development for nearly 20 years and loves helping donors and organizations change the world. She has expertise in devising creative and strategic solutions, working with prominent donors and board members, building relationships and teams, and community engagement. She is skilled in organizing people, information, and programs for meaningful impact. Currently the Senior Director of Development for National University, Laura is also President-elect for Association of Fundraising Professionals San Diego Chapter. So welcome, Bree and Laura. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just going to dive right in because I know that we don't have a lot of time. It will go by very quickly. So we're just going to dive right in. So I'm going to give you both kind of an opportunity just to introduce yourselves, your organization, your role in fundraising, any events or campaigns maybe that you have coming up. So why don't you share a little bit about yourselves and kind of what brought you here today? And Laura, let's maybe start with you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Bree. As was mentioned, I've been in fundraising now for almost 20 years. And for me, it's so exciting to get to help people change the world. And I've had the privilege of doing that at a number of different organizations. With National University, it's really exciting. We are mostly online education for adult learners. And we're really helping change the landscape of where education is going to be more personalized, to help folks to take this their own information from where they are and help them get to the next step. And so I've been in this role for a little over a year now, and we have been launching our campaign our fundraising efforts. While NU is almost 50 years old, fundraising at NU is actually pretty new. And so last year I worked on our first new NU Giving Day. So we were expecting an online platform for this, and we were planning on doing it on May 7th. And then COVID happened. So we did a whole lot of shifting, and then the nation decided it was going to have Giving Tuesday Now on May 5th, specific to COVID. And so we had to shift our timeframes around and juggle our priorities and make sure that we weren't, you always want to be able to align with what donors are interested in. And when COVID was, especially when it first started, focusing on healthcare needs and on food insecurity and issues like that were really prevalent in everyone's minds. So we were cautious about how we wanted to go ahead and position NU so that it didn't feel like we were, just jumping on a bandwagon that didn't make sense for us. Amazingly, our chancellor decided to offer free online education to any high school student or college student who was impacted by COVID. So we were able to shift our fundraising efforts around providing emergency scholarships for people in need. Folks could get up to 3 classes free online. And while a lot of universities have been pivoting online, NU's been there for 20 years. And here's a big surprise for some of you. Online education there's ways to do it that are better than a Zoom and your professor just reading their notes. So we were able to focus on fundraising that direction. Right now, we're focusing on our year-end campaign and starting our planning, and we're using a lot of the lessons learned from this spring in keeping that steady drumbeat of why NU is relevant right now, and where we're headed, and how folks can be part of really changing education to be more personalized.
Awesome. That's so great. Well, thanks for sharing that. I heard a lot of keywords in there: shifting, adapting. Things that I think we've all had to get really good at in the last several months. So Bree, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit, maybe talk about Junior Achievement of Arizona and the different types of events and campaigns that you guys are working on.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. So I'm Bree Tournas. I work for Junior Achievement of Arizona. I'm a development and events manager. So my primary role for the organization has been fundraising events. So clearly my job duties have really shifted over the last 6 months or so. When the state and I guess the whole country shut down due to COVID, we were just gearing up for a golf tournament that we do every year. And so that was pretty tough on us. We really had to figure out how are we going to bring in funds for this when there's no way we can have a tournament. Our tournament date would have been right in the middle of the shutdown, so there was just no way. So we've had to get creative, specifically with my role. I've had to find new ways to bring in money when I can't necessarily offer a large list of sponsorship benefits. So it's been interesting. Our primary goal is educating students here in Arizona, and with schools shutting down, that was also difficult, but we were able to offer online education and online resources. And so during the summer, typically we don't serve any students, but this year, because we adapted quickly and we got creative, over the summer we were actually able to serve 8,000 students when that number typically would have been 0. And now that we're back into the fall semester, we had all summer to kind of prepare and get ready for these online courses. And so now we're doing that, and we're serving as many students as we have in the past during this fall semester. So it's pretty exciting. And so my role is, as far as fundraising, it has changed a lot, but really I have the same mission and the same goal, and I'm able to communicate that to our donors. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a great growth opportunity for our entire organization.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's great. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the goals and mission of your organization, because I feel like that's the one thing that just hasn't changed. That at the end of the day, we're all very mission driven. And it's really important to remember, as you both have mentioned now, as we shift and adapt and that kind of thing. So let's address kind of the elephant in the room. So what kind of challenges, and you've touched on this a little bit so far, but what kind of challenges has your organization faced as a result of COVID-19? So have either of you experienced any, drop-offs in donations, any layoffs in your staff? Any other challenges that either of you have faced? And Bree, let's maybe start with you.
Yeah, well, we have been very lucky as an organization, and I think a lot of this is due to our awesome leadership team, but we have not had to do any layoffs, which I think is huge for a nonprofit that runs on donations, to say. So that's really exciting and makes me very proud of where I work. Early on, we definitely saw a drop off in donations. Without a doubt, I think a lot of our partners were just nervous about the future, which is extremely fair. So we did definitely see a drop in donations at that point, and have, like I mentioned, that golf tournament, we actually did wind up having to cancel it, and I'm not really sure there was a way around it. So that hurt us because all the fundraising that we would have had from that golf tournament, we did not have. We also have quite a few smaller fundraising events that are mainly peer-to-peer fundraising events that we typically do all summer long, and they end with a party at the bowling alley where your whole staff comes and everybody bowls together and it's tons of fun. Well, that's not something we were able to do this summer. But we were quickly able to pivot those events to online events. So the peer-to-peer function was still there because that was all done online anyway. And then instead of meeting at the bowling alley, we met on Zoom and did a trivia night or a bingo night. And so we made it work, and we were actually very successful in that. And a lot of the companies that we worked with were able to raise, between 80 and 90% of what they would have raised in a previous year. And the neat thing for us was we didn't have the expenses of the bowling. So really we were coming out a little bit ahead on those events because of the lack of expenses. We have a golf tournament that we're working on right now for December. And we're fortunate enough to hopefully believe that we're going to be able to move forward with that, with social distancing in place, of course, and thankfully with golf, that is somewhat easier to do. So we're pretty lucky there. We're also working on a couple other virtual events with students and a couple other fundraisers as well. So it's definitely been a challenge, as I mentioned before, but it's very doable. And thankfully, overall, our funding, we haven't seen a huge drop in funding. At this point, it seems that a lot of our partners are more comfortable and more on board to continue with their normal sponsorships.
That's awesome. That's really great to hear that you guys were able to, like you said, adapt so quickly to, get those donations, back up and running and get people involved. So Laura, what about you and over at National University? Any drop off in donations, any, change in hierarchy, anything like that? Any kind of challenges that you guys have had to face the last few months?
Yeah, what's been interesting for us, again, because it's a newer fundraising program, we still have nowhere to go but up. So that was frankly a blessing, because while we do have, some donors who've given over time, it's not the same level of pipeline I've had in some other organizations. So for us, what was interesting, we had planned out for our NU Giving Day for spring. We had planned out a really robust timeline, working with marketing, working with alumni relations, engaging some of our student scholars, all these different components. And then, mid-March, everything went a little bit out the window. We had been planning on having kickoff events at our different physical locations. We're in a few different spots in San Diego, as well as Fresno, Sacramento. So we were working with the different alumni boards of directors there of our alumni chapters to make fun, engaging opportunities for folks to get to be part of where NU is going. And obviously that had to go sideways. We were anticipating engaging with some of our faculty and staff and asking them to be ambassadors. Well, all of a sudden they're taking 300 courses online in 24 hours, and maybe the fundraising campaign isn't their #1 priority. Now, whether I think it should be or not is a whole nother story. But so we had to pivot, and And it worked for us. We were able to talk with one of our staff members is an amazing social media maven. She's on all day. I don't know how she gets her work done and does that, but she does. And so we changed our strategy a little to focus more on her and the area. She's in charge of our veterans and military area. So that's obviously a huge pull for most folks. So it was easy for us to talk with her, figure out what students we could be highlighting, what great stories we want to share. We have videos from these scholars talking about how scholarship support has changed their lives and why it's making such a difference. And that was really big for us. I think another piece that was important is, it's peer-to-peer fundraising, I think especially. We all want the next Ice Bucket Challenge, right? But likelihood is, sorry, probably not. So how do we do it in a scope that's reasonable, and how do we grow? Because it's easy to want to knock it completely out of the ballpark, but this is our first year doing this with a brand new fundraising team. And so we had to look at, yeah, that's a great idea for next year. Or that's a great idea once we have some people established in this kind of a role as an ambassador, as a longtime donor, etc. And so we actually have a whole list of stuff that might be great for in-person or for future once we get there. And I think that was something that was a real blessing to us, to be able to say, that is a great idea and there's no way we can execute it well now. So let's move it to the side. And I think that COVID and life in general, I mean, there's always things shifting that mean that we get to put on our creativity hats. And I think that's part of why a lot of folks got into fundraising. It's a puzzle. We like connecting people with solutions. And right now, frankly, we get to do that a little bit more. I have friends in really big organizations with a lot of hierarchy that maybe normally have only this particular box they can be in, but right now they get to break out of that. So, I mean, that's my encouragement for folks is, if you want to try something, now's the time.
Yeah, that's for sure. This is definitely, I think that's been one of my, silver lining here, right? But I think that's been one of my favorite things about working remotely is I've had the opportunity to see what a lot of different nonprofit organizations are doing. And it astounds me how creative people are. And I work in marketing all the time, and I'm just like, wow, these people are so creative. So it's really cool to see what everyone is doing. But I do want to take a step back. You've mentioned social media. You both have mentioned, connections. That's been a pretty big keyword that's come up for both of you, virtual engagement. So let's talk about social media a little bit. So now, how do your organizations use social media as part of your events or your campaigns? So, for instance, what social media platforms are you guys using? Which ones do you find the most helpful? And what are you doing on social media to attract donors and really make the most out of your virtual events?
I'm happy to start with that one. So with National University, we have our official NU channels that our marketing department manages. And then we also have our alumni association side. And so we're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter there. And we really think that for us, engaging with the alumni is going to be more lucrative than with the general public, for obvious reasons, especially as we're building. So while we do work with marketing and integrate with their social media calendar, we have more flexibility with the alumni side. Naturally, it's smaller than the overall, so we balance that. And I really recommend, like, we're about to have a meeting with our marketing department to see what parts of year end we can be focusing on and helping them understand fundraising, because that's been something that's been a little bit interesting, right? They're experts in marketing, but they don't necessarily know, okay, on Giving Tuesday, we want to do 6 touches during the day, and here's how and here's why. Their metrics might show that our students and alumni are more active on social media at 5 p.m. But if we launch a Giving Tuesday campaign at 5 p.m., we're going to get $1.50. So we're trying to balance those, and then featuring students as much as possible. People give to people, fundraising 101 right there. And being able to say your money can help support a student like this is a story that doesn't get old. And so we're really featuring our breadth of students. We've got nursing students, we have teachers, we have educators, we have police, we have Homeland Security, we have cybersecurity. So we really want to demonstrate that breadth because these are folks who are changing the world. As I mentioned, it's adult learners, so our average student's 31. They're already in their career path. With their degree, they're able to move up faster and make changes sooner. And so those are some of the components we really feature and make sure that our social media is focused on.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up stories. I know storytelling is a huge part of what we do in nonprofits and fundraising. So it's really important to do that. And that's one thing that I really love about storytelling is that you can tell stories in just a couple of sentences. So you can do it on an organic social media post. You can use stories and images and graphics to launch a pretty cool paid advertising campaign through Facebook. You can write blogs that are sharing stories and share those on social media. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And Bree, I know that you're a little bit different. So you have to work very closely with your marketing team to to promote your virtual events and whatnot. So what does your process look like, and how are you guys using social media?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, our marketing team handles our social media, so it's not something that I work with personally. But we're on all the different social platforms, but Facebook definitely is best for us. But that's where we get the most interaction, and that's likely because of the age group of the majority of our donors. So one thing we love to do is share pictures of our students and quotes that they have used in the classroom. And so sometimes it's a really cute kindergartner with just a silly little quote about what they learned in JA today. And that, usually gets a lot of traffic because everyone loves a little 5-year-old. But all the way up to our high school students where their quotes are more in depth about, what they learned and why it's going to be productive for their future. So we're working on growing our social media. And as far as events go, we don't do a ton of advertising on social because most of our events are more, I guess private through company sponsorship. So advertising on social isn't a huge benefit for us since we're typically marketing to companies. So that's more of a way for, of course, personal donations to come in. So we do a lot of, like, for example, we did a virtual 50-50 about 6 weeks ago. We wrapped it up. And that was we got a lot of positive feedback on particularly Facebook for that event. So we were able to raise a decent chunk of money doing that virtual 50-50. And then it was great because the winner, she won, I think it was a couple $1,000s, and she promoted us so much on Facebook, which was awesome. That's the best outcome you can ask for. So we definitely have had some positives on social, but for our larger events, we don't use it as much. We'll share the event pictures afterwards, but those smaller online fundraisers, it's definitely been a positive.
Yeah, that's really great. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because I know with social media, a lot of times everybody, seems to think that it has to be content, and just, essentially like overloading social media a little bit. And we really don't need to do that. We could be a lot more intentional with our social media strategy. And so I really love that you brought that up, that for you, with some of those smaller virtual events, it's just not what works for your organization. So I think that's a really key part to social media is understanding, how it's going to benefit your organization, how it's going to, drive those donations and boost engagement, and, not get caught up in the trap of just sharing everything all the time, but being very intentional with what we're sharing and making sure that it directly relates to, your organization's mission and goals and whatnot. So thanks for bringing that up. And so speaking of engagement, we've talked a lot about how to engage donors and, engage some of those external stakeholders and people that we're trying to reach. But I know that a lot of what we're going through right now, it's a pretty big internal struggle as well. Different discussions that you're having to have with a lot of different departments, board members and that kind of thing. So what kind of discussions are you having? Who are you engaging with? And, how are those discussions, looking and evolving as you start to work on your virtual events? And Bree, do you maybe want to start with this one?
Yeah, so for us, I had mentioned earlier our summer events that we typically do that rely so much on peer-to-peer fundraising. And again, we used to have those in-person events at the end of these as kind of thank you for to thank all of the fundraisers for raising money. So really just talking with those, I call them my coordinators from each different company, has been key for me. Just staying on top of the communication there, because any given summer, I'm working with anywhere from 25 to 35 companies. So I have 25 to 35 contacts that that I'm reaching out to and trying to schedule these events. So really, right at the beginning of the pandemic, when we realized that, May and June is when we have these bowling events, and that's not going to happen. So getting on the phone with all of those coordinators right away and reaching out to them before they had a chance to reach out to me, I feel like was really important, because it just showed them, okay, I'm on top of this. I have ideas of how we can move forward, and just really staying on top of it, I would say, is the most important thing for us anyway in this situation. So those coordinators were key, and calling them sometimes multiple times a week, trying not to be bugging them, but being very persistent and following up with emails. And I believe that's why we were able to retain so many of our events, even though they drastically were shifted to virtual. So for me, that was definitely the most important thing, was just keeping up to date and reaching out to those company coordinators that do all the work really to engage with their employees so that their employees fundraise for us.
Yeah, that's definitely a really great point. And Laura, what about you? What are some of your internal conversations looking like as you navigate your virtual events?
Yeah, so for us, our department, I'm part of external relations, and so we're really strategizing how all of our messaging is consistent, making sure that what we are emphasizing out there is what everyone needs to hear. So for instance, with the COVID free education, that was being shared on our alumni channels, it was being shared with our leadership, it was being shared by our leadership, etc. I completely agree with Bree on the polite persistence too, because it was a great time for us to touch base with friends and colleagues in other organizations. I have a lot of folks in town that I know from previous roles that even if they haven't supported NU yet, I know that there's alignment and interest. And so I shared out the information about that emergency education component to about 10 different organizations and my contacts there. And one of them actually ended up a few months later, sent us a link saying, please go ahead and apply for COVID funding, you've been approved. So it wasn't even like an official ask, it was just my nice, let's share what's going on. I think what we saw is everyone was completely overwhelmed, right? COVID hits, everyone's sorting out health and safety, the safety of their families. There's priorities that happen during an emergency that aren't necessarily our day-to-day business. So being able to be hey, by the way, great things are happening over here, emails and I had some phone calls as well with folks, really helped get that across. And I mean, our leadership was on the news, was working with the governor. There was some heavy hitting conversations happening from the top down. And I think that's super important because we wouldn't have gotten the same type of reach and bandwidth otherwise. And then too, it becomes something that people want to know, right? Like, this is a big deal and you want to be in the know. And so even if we don't have it wouldn't be on your plate or something that you'd be privy to otherwise, you feel like an insider. So I think sharing that clear communication with our alumni, with our corporate and foundation supporters, with our individual donors, our board members, was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you both hit on really important parts here with that internal communication. I know that's been tough because when it comes down to it, I mean, essentially we're all kind of external right now anyway, that we can't just, walk into the office next door and, strike up a conversation about this. And so I think we've all had to be very intentional with, with our time and how we're, discussing things as a team and very collaborative in a different way. So thank you both so much for your insights on that. And so we talked a lot about the, kind of getting ready for the event. How are we promoting it? What kind of conversations are we having? But let's talk about the event itself. There are so many tech tools out there. We have GoToWebinar, we have Zoom, we have WebEx, we have Google Meet, we have Slack. I mean, there's so many out there right now that it's almost overwhelming. So how do you identify the right technological tools for your campaign or your event? I mean, so we're talking things like cost, or does it integrate with, certain systems that you already have in place? So now how are you identifying what tools work best for you? And then how are you measuring the success of that tool after your event?
So my department, the whole external relations team, actually had taken on pre-COVID an assessment of our technological tools. There's been different people in different seats over time, different contracts with different vendors, and we were really concerned that we were probably paying for opportunities and tools that we weren't fully utilizing. So we made a big old chart of, okay, what does development need? What does alumni relations need? What does communications need? And then what do we have that fills those pieces? Well, how much are we paying for them? Do these guys already do that and we paid a second vendor anyhow? What's integrating? Which communications will talk to each other so that somebody doesn't just spend all day downloading from one and uploading to another, etc. And it was really helpful for us. I inherited a few platforms that we went with, especially for the peer-to-peer fundraising. And then turns out that a vendor that we had another contract with had that also, and we could add it for cheaper. And so we're swapping vendors because it just makes more sense because of the communication piece. We're going to be able to track the email communications, who are we touching, in what ways, who's interacting, and all of that can be uploaded back to our systems in a way that's easy for us to prioritize who should be the donors and prospects we're engaging with, etc. And that's something we're looking at across the university as well. As an example, we use the Razor's Edge NXT database, and we're talking with our government relations folks and our federal grants person and the assistants to leadership about how they could be using the system as well so that we can share communication more clearly. With this particular program, we have unlimited licenses, so we really want to utilize that and make sure that it's not just our corner of the world that is using the technology, but that we can have that broader university conversation. So we've had presentations from all sorts of different vendors, some of which we love but just can't afford right now, but once we get here we can look at it, that type of thing. And it was I really recommend that type of an audit for any department that maybe hasn't taken a look lately, because technology is changing all the time and there's tools out there that we didn't even know. In one case, I thought our contract was up. We have 2 more years with somebody that has a huge dashboard of information that we didn't even know we had access to. So it was really great to learn that we have way more resources at our fingertips than we realized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought that up too, because actually my organization just recently did the same thing where you kind of go through an audit, and it can even be as simple as calling, like your Razor's Edge, support team or something, and saying, hey, listen, I want to make sure that we're getting the most out of what we're paying for here. Are there any services that we are paying for that we are not currently using? And there's all sorts of trainings and whatnot online just to help everybody kind of make sense of what it is that they're using and use it to the best of their abilities, really kind of maximize their ROI for a lot of these platforms that we're using. But Bree, what about you? What platforms, have you taken a look at? What kind of tools have you used for some of your campaigns and events?
Yeah, so I think that as an organization, we're very well prepared for this. I'm not even sure we knew that we were prepared for a situation like this, but it just happened. It happened to be that we were. About 18 months ago, we got a very large grant that was just for technology, just for updating our technology, which was really great. In that process, we were introduced to Zoom, and we were able to do a big integration with our organization, where we were able to put big Zoom conference screens in all of our conference rooms. So all of us have gotten familiar with Zoom, and that's actually how we were running some of our committees already for our events. So we have these committees for events that raise a lot of the money that we bring in for our events. And it's always been a struggle in the past to find a time and date at least once a month that works for everybody to meet. So we started doing hybrid meetings where we'd have, a chunk of people come into the office, and then people who weren't able to make it to the office just logged in via Zoom, and we could all meet together. So we were already doing that prior to COVID, and I'm so thankful we were, because that has made the transition very easy. We also, a couple of years ago, got together with a bunch of different JA areas, and we were able to negotiate a contract for a online fundraising platform. And again, I'm so thankful we already had that set in place, because it has been so convenient to have during this process. during this time when almost everything we're doing is online fundraising. So it already has that peer-to-peer fundraising platform built in that online fundraising. So we've been able to do things like our virtual 50-50 and our peer-to-peer giving just through that site. And so that's been amazing. And all of that links directly to our CRM. So everything just filters into our CRM and is recorded that way. So we can follow up and we can see, you know, this online giving campaign raised this much and we put this much effort into it. So it was the successful. So we can see what we should do again and honestly what we probably shouldn't put the effort in to do it again as well. So I think we were really well set up for it. And again, I'm thankful because it's made all of our lives so much easier.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. And I want to go back to a point that you just hit on towards the end about, you know, some of those like key performance indicators and metrics that you're looking at after the event. And I think a lot of people, a lot of event planners can kind of fall into the trap that when the event is over, our job is done, we did it, everything is done. But there's a whole component of the event that happens after the event. What are we doing with, you know, the people that we met? What are we doing to drive donations as a result of that event? And so there's really that pre-event, you know, campaign and getting everything out there, what happens during the event, but then also what happens after the event. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So obviously, you know, tracking these campaign communications and data and whatnot throughout the entire process is extremely important. So what key performance indicators or metrics do both of your organizations use and why, and how are you tracking these to evaluate the success of your events? And Laura, let's maybe jump back over to you.
Sure. So I love data. Data makes me really happy. So for me, I love face-to-face, person-to-person interactions as well. But if I don't have the data to back up who I should be prioritizing and why, I'm going to have some troubles. So for us, so as I mentioned, we have Raiser's Edge, which has our full alumni database and donor database within it. And with, you know, I'm looking at because we're new, of course, we've got a dollar goal, we've got a number of donors we're looking for. We're also looking at average gift size. We're looking at our retention rates. We're looking at our live bunts and sci bunts. For those who aren't familiar, that's donors who gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. So lapsed or lapsing donors. And then sci bunts is really prospects. It's some years or future years, depending on which version you're using, but unfortunately not this year. So I'm pulling, for instance, NXT, I have to recommend, and I'm sure other CRMs have this type of information as well, but for me, NXT has some platforms that it shows you a little chart and it tells you how many of your people are lapsing and how many are at risk and how many are whatever. And you can click on it and it shows you like, these are the 50 people that you need to be reaching out to. And right now, as we're focusing on our year-end fundraising campaign planning, I actually just pulled a list of our folks who gave last year to our online campaigns that our team is going to be reaching out to from a stewardship perspective to touch and remind them of what great impact their gift had at NU. These aren't solicitations, it's just stewardship and cultivation. And then, of course, our hope is that as they get the information towards the end of the year for their year-end giving, that they'll be really pleased with what they've been hearing from us. And hopefully, of course, too, we'll be able to elevate some of those annual gifts up to major gift levels and ask for personal support of different programs.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I do want to pivot a little bit, because Bree, I know that you mentioned some of your KPIs and metrics that you look at after the event, but I want to go back to you, Bree, about, let's talk about peer-to-peer fundraising for just a moment. I know that peer-to-peer fundraising is a huge part of what Junior Achievement of Arizona does. And Laura, I know that you've mentioned a couple of peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns that your organization works on as well. But just for those of our attendees who are maybe not quite as familiar with peer-to-peer fundraising, what exactly is it, and how does your organization leverage those peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns to help increase donations? So Bree, let's jump back over to you and learn a little bit more about your peer-to-peer fundraising strategy.
So peer-to-peer fundraising is a huge thing that we do at JA. It brings in a lot of dollars every year. So really what it is we have people sign up on a website, and they then reach out to their peers, their family members, their friends, and they ask for donations for Junior Achievement of Arizona. So it's such a great tool because you have, your direct audience that you are reaching out to, which let's say it's 50 people. And then all of those 50 people are going to reach out to their peers. So you're reaching a huge amount of people with honestly fairly little effort. And something that we have seen that works very well is when you partner a peer-to-peer fundraising event with a volunteer event. So a lot of the companies that we do peer-to-peer fundraising events with, sometime throughout the year, they also volunteer in the classroom to teach our programs. So it's typically that same audience, and they can go out and say, I've personally seen this. I've seen this affect students. I believe in their mission, and that makes all the difference, right? It's hard to ask people for donations when you're not passionate about a mission, and it's usually very unsuccessful. So really partnering the two, volunteering and peer-to-peer fundraising, it goes a long, long way. But it can be so successful. It's amazing how much people are willing to donate to their friends and family and peers. So we have a lot of success with peer-to-peer fundraising. It's something that I would recommend to any and all organizations because it was simply because of the reach of people that you reach throughout the process.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. And I know that we're coming up on time a little bit, so we'll move on to our last question, I believe, before we get into the Q&A section and everything. But let's talk a little bit about how your roles pivoted. And I know that we've already talked about that a little bit, but maybe even some other roles in your organization as a result of the pandemic. So how are you activating some of your supporters and champions and stakeholders in that engagement strategy? And so I know you've both mentioned, tech tools and that kind of thing. But how did this pivot? So what did it look like before? And then what does it look like now that we're all in a virtual setting? And Laura, let's maybe pass it back over to you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this has been a time that I'm really reaching out to my contacts at other organizations and seeing how they're doing. It's interesting because for all that we're all busy and a little overwhelmed, boy, are people loving to connect. I had a Zoom with one of my colleagues who I've worked with for years. He's on the giving side of an organization locally. And we spent 10 minutes just like, how are you? Before we even touched any business. Because people are excited to see someone else on their screen. They're excited to interact with someone else. Right now, phone calls are super, super popular. So people have the time to call you back. People want to expand their circles a little bit and find out something else that's going on in the world. And so we've been finding that those touching in with our alumni, with our donors, with our prospects, with our contacts of whichever level has been really lucrative. And it's exciting. We're in this business because we like people. So figuring out how we can keep connecting right now has been really critical. Because NU, again, is newer in its major gift fundraising side, we pivoted some things. We're hoping for a fall launch party at a board member's house with here's where NU is going with the movers and shakers in town. We're not going to do that over Zoom. We're not going to get the same kind of engagement as with these folks that maybe only are peripherally related to us yet than we would in person. So there's some stuff we're just going to wait on. And with that, our fundraising office has actually emphasized our focus on foundations and grant support a bit more because we have the ability to do some more prospecting in that area. And with the COVID shifts, workforce development, racial equity, social justice, there's a lot of things that NU has strong programs in that are really key right now, that this is the time for us to apply for those opportunities. So we've broadened our net, as it were, to keep touching individuals in the ways that are appropriate and meaningful, but also being sure that we're bringing in revenue, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all still going to come down to, COVID or no COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on a couple of key things that I think are really important. And in fact, actually at our organization, every 2 weeks, we have an hour-long meeting, and we just call it our water cooler chat, where our entire team gets together, and we don't even have to talk about work. We can talk about whatever. So we've had conversations where we just start talking about, Tiger King and all of the other, binge-worthy shows that are happening right now. And it can be really fun to do that. And of course, for us, it's just internal. But doing something like that, even just with your donors, like you said, or with your alumni, or, with the constituents that are part of your organization, like you said, it just kind of brings you like a breath of fresh air for just a moment, where we don't have to be super professional. We don't have to, we all just kind of understand that we're in this together. So thanks for bringing that up. And Bree, what about you? How things kind of, pivoted and changed as a result of all of this for you?
Yeah, I mean, Laura hit on some very good points there. Fundraising is so much about making that connection. And so typically with our donors, a lot of times we'll, meet for lunch or have them come into the office, and it's really nice to have that personal connection and, see each other, and in person is kind of unbeatable, right? And I think we've all realized that more than ever right now. So yeah, picking up the phone or doing Zoom meetings has been very productive. And Laura, again, made a great point. A lot of times when I'm talking to donors, we'll spend 10 to 15 minutes just catching up first, talking about working remotely, and if they have kids, how's the process going of having them be in school and from home, and all the virtual learning. So I think that is so important, honestly, probably more now than ever, just because fundraising is so much about that connection. So I just to hit on Laura's points again, just reiterating that I'm right there with you.
I have to share, so I'm part of the board of Association of Fundraising Professionals San Diego, and we're planning and getting ready for a National Philanthropy Day in November. And this year the theme is resiliency through philanthropy, but I am in love with the tagline, which is virtually unstoppable. And that's it. Fundraising is virtually unstoppable. So here we go.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Jessie, for moderating that panel. And thank you, Laura and Bree, for so many great key takeaways and tips for our audience. I just want to let everyone know who are watching now that there is a handout available for you to download on your GoToWebinar panel. So you can download the handout there, where Bree and Laura have listed out some great tips and ideas for you all to use right now in your organizations. So before we get into the questions that have been coming in through the questions box, I just want to ask Bree and Laura to maybe give one key or major tip that you think any organization could use, and then maybe an overview of what tools you are using for your virtual events. So we could start with Bree.
So my one big takeaway from this would just be don't, and this is very specific to events, but don't cancel your event. Find a way to make it virtual. Find a way to still do it. Because there is a lot of benefits from virtual events. Your costs are going to be a lot lower too. So, if you need to bring down your fundraising goal, there's nothing wrong with that. Definitely make sure that goal is attainable. But don't cancel. Move forward with virtual. There's a lot of companies that are very used to that right now, so you're not going to scare away your donors. Yeah, that's my biggest thing. Move forward no matter how you have to, and be flexible.
Okay, and then what tools is your organization using now? Because a lot of people are curious.
Yes, so QGive is our online platform that we use for peer-to-peer fundraising and our online fundraising campaigns. And it's very easy to use. It's a great tool. And actually, most of the JA areas around the country use it. So I highly recommend it.
And then Laura, do you have a final tip and trick for our audience?
Yeah, I think my biggest reminder is you're smart, you're creative, you can do this. Like, this is the fun time. You have resources. I think it's easy for us to feel maybe limited right now and feel like there's so much we can't do. But there's so much you can. And for me, I think, think about the technology platforms you're using. They probably have functionality you're not touching. You mentioned Christine platforms, so I'll share a couple real quick. So we have used Ruffalo, Noel Levitz before for our Giving Day and their campaign. They have a platform called Scale Funder that a lot of the major universities use that's really beautiful. This year we're using, so iModules, which I guess just changed its name. So it's actually Anthology now, but you've probably heard of it as iModules, is what our alumni webpage is through, and our career database and career services center is through. And they have a gamification software that's we're switching to this year. And they've put together a Giving Day platform for us that is gorgeous. And I'm so excited for us to move forward with it. And then I mentioned Razor's Edge NXT. I think those are the main ones that we're using these. Oh, and then from a plan giving perspective, we use Stelter. There's a few other great ones out there, but Stelter's, our contract with them includes a lawyer who can actually help with plan giving questions. We can't afford a plan giving staff member, so for us, it made more sense to go that way and be able to use their resources.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for sharing. We're going to dive right into the questions because we do have a lot. One question is, how do you determine what to charge when there's so many free virtual events being offered nowadays? And how would you structure your sponsorships and how to promote those to your sponsors as well? So I think we're going to Bree first.
It's a great question. It is hard to come up with a price to charge for virtual events because, like you mentioned, a lot of them are free right now. Since most of the events I do virtually are through a specific company, and I work with one coordinator to design that event, I use their advice. I ask them, what do you think your employees would be willing to pay for this? Because we've done events in the past, of course, they look different. There's always been a registration fee, so I think that's been a little bit easier for us. But just overall, I would say try to stick to something fairly low, even if it's $10. If you have a lot of people on, it's still going to give you a decent chunk. So that I would just say don't make it too crazy high, especially if it's a brand new event that you can't necessarily vouch for because you've never done it before. And then as far as sponsorships, if you're doing an event that you've done in the past in person and now it's online, try to stick with your original numbers first when you're approaching sponsors. And if they don't go for it because maybe it's too high because of what they're facing due to COVID, or they're saying that can I have a discount since it's virtual? Absolutely, discount your prices if you need to, but try to stick. My best advice would be try to stick with your original amount of what you sold it at when it was an in-person event, because a lot of times with a virtual event specifically, you might have more of an audience, so they actually might be getting more for their money.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, a lot of the events I've been going to fundraising wise, it's free to go. And then there's an ask, right? And so there's been online, probably QGIve and other vendors. Some, like a lot of our local folks have relationships with Southwest Airlines, and everyone who gives is entered to win a pair of tickets. The last person who gives before 5 p.m. is going to wear a pair of tickets, etc. So they've done some fun things there. And of course, you do the work on the front end to make sure still that you're going to have gifts at the levels you expect. So those who are sharing their gift amounts, that you can have that excitement. But I think that that's a way that making sure you still have a good ask. Don't leave that part out, even if you're not having to pay for lunch now.
That's a great point. Another question we have, I think also Jessie, you might be able to touch on this too, is how to even reach out to potential donors right now in terms of even marketing your virtual events that you have been pivoting and changing. But are some best practices to engage or entice donors to come to virtual events right now? And Jessie, if you have any.
Yeah, sure. So we actually have a pretty, in my opinion, it's a pretty robust communication strategy before an event. And a big thing for us is anything that we send out to donors or other constituents or people that we want to invite to these events, we don't want any of our marketing materials to be too text heavy or anything like that. So we try to find the most concise message and identify those benefits that they are going to care most about. And then that's what we communicate to everyone. And so we normally send two emails per event. So we'll send out an initial invite of sorts, and then we'll send out a reminder invitation later on. And then we also do, maybe 2 to 3 social media posts leading up to the event to let people know that that's something that they can attend. And we just try to also consider what it's going to be like from the user experience. So is it easy for them to access your event? How are they receiving so we use Zoom quite a bit. How are they receiving the Zoom information? How long is this event going to last? What are they going to get out of this event? How does it pertain to them? And, really just kind of thinking mostly about them and what they care about, and letting them know what they're going to get in terms of value out of the event. So that's a little bit about what we do. We leverage our social media, we leverage our email marketing campaigns, and we do all of that through our own CRM. We also do, depending on the event and what we have and what our budget is, we'll even do paid social media advertising. We primarily do that through Facebook and Instagram. But same thing, we also try to, even as small as, the images that we use. We try to use images that, Laura and Bree have both touched on storytelling. So we'll even use images from other events that we've done, or, images that show, happy, smiling people. In a sense, when it all comes down to all of our messaging tries to be concise, outline the benefits, and in a sense, kind of tells a story about what our goal is.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think that definitely answers their question, and they said thank you, so thank you for that. And we have a couple specific questions for Laura and Bree. Laura, we have one question asking about how to kind of pivot a virtual event into becoming a mini campaign. So how did you change and pivot your campaign event to become virtual?
I think that's a great question. So right now, what I've been seeing with events, one of the limitations about in-person events is that it's really hard to get all the people you want in the room at the same time. With virtual events, you can pre-record, and let me emphasize, pre-record. Don't let people get creative. Don't worry they're going to stumble. Make it look like it's live, but you can video folks. For instance, I was at a Girl Scouts event, and they were able to get all these amazing women in town do videos who were all Girl Scouts growing up. They never would have gotten all 25 of them on stage at the same time. It wouldn't have happened. Schedules don't allow it. But there was a congresswoman, and there was the head of this and everything else. And so consider who you can highlight maybe in a way that you wouldn't be able to usually. And then, of course, add a campaign with it. Get some catchy taglines, something short, something cogent that makes people excited. Don't forget that it's about people giving to people. Be sure you're highlighting your mission. But I think that being able to highlight folks you wouldn't otherwise be able to get in the room, so to speak, can be a real draw.
Thank you so much. And then we have one question for Bree. Bree, you mentioned a lot of how successful your 50/50 raffle event was. People are just asking if you could elaborate a little bit more on that, and if you have any suggestions if they're in a state where raffles aren't allowed.
Yes. Okay. So for my first piece of advice would be definitely research. I guess it's the gambling laws in your state. I'm lucky enough to work for an organization where our president is also a lawyer, so she knows, and if she doesn't know, she's able to get me a lot of answers. But I also did a lot of research on my own, and I saw a different nonprofit that had done a 50/50 raffle. So I got an email about it, and I looked at theirs, and they're also an Arizona-based organization. Looked at theirs, I read through their rules. And of course, the rules have to be very, very specific. And that's how I decided to move forward with it. So, maybe just start by doing the research of, your state. Is there any other organizations doing a 50/50 raffle? Because if there is, you can not steal anything from their organization, but use the site and kind of use it to build yours. Use similar ideas. So what we did is we did a 6-month campaign, or I'm sorry, a 6-week campaign, where we sold tickets. We advertised through our email system and through social media. That's all we did. We didn't spend any money on it at all. So of course we had staff time, but that was it. That was our only expense. And it was really just a first run for us because we didn't know, are we going to raise $1,000? Are we going to raise $10,000? We had no idea. So we made the price points pretty small, anywhere from $5 to $50. So anybody could participate that wanted to. And again, it was all online. So even at the end when we did the drawing, we just used a generator, an automatic generator to pick a name, and that's how we determined the winner. So yeah, definitely just do a lot of research on the laws in your state. See if anybody else is doing one in your state, and then when you sit down to write your rules, just make sure they're very, very clear. And if you do have somebody, a lawyer specifically, who could look over your rules, I would recommend it. Just better safe than sorry.
I will emphasize that California has rules about everything, so make sure you double check.
Well, unfortunately, that was our last question and all we had time for, but I just want to say thank you to both our panelists, Bree and Laura, and thank you, Jessie, so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise and your wisdom to our audience. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience for your time and participation. To help us continue to improve our monthly webinar series and ensure we are providing value to our audience, if you could please take a few minutes to complete the survey that will pop up on your screen. We hope you all are safe and healthy and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you everyone for all that you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.